I am so excited today to have the host of one of my favorite podcasts here in Portland, Kristin from Rational in Portland.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I probably reached out to you as like one of the first people a long time ago. And so, yeah, I appreciate you coming on.
You thought I was a man?
Did I?
Yes, just like everybody else on Twitter.
I think that's,
thinks that
Is it because you're rational?
I actually asked a friend, so a friend of mine it sounds funny, but I asked a friend, he thought I was a man. And I said, what is that all about? Because everybody on Twitter thinks I'm a man without exception. There's never an exception unless they know me or they've heard the show. If they discover me on Twitter, they think I'm a man. And he said, it's the rational part.
It is, because we're not supposed to be, right?
It's a masculine word.
I
understand.
I don't know. I guess it just, maybe because I'm a litigator and there are more women. I mean, there aren't a ton still, but there are more. And most of them are my friends. I'm living in this probably rational bubble and maybe we all just have too much testosterone. I don't know.
Well, I apologize for thinking that.
It did not bother me.
Okay.
I think in our exchange, I even said you had listened to it and you said, you know what? I thought you were a guy. I apologize. And I said,
that's right.
You know what? That is typical and it's not a problem. And that just means that you're normal.
Okay.
Funny. You know, before I used like a female picture on my Twitter, people thought I was a man all the time too. Like the way they reacted to me, even though my name on there is Cocaine Michelle, like however I talk, I don't know why, but people will react to me like I was a man. Maybe it's just a vibe.
It's common, I guess.
Like maybe, yeah.
But yeah, I'm trying to phrase this in the right way, but and I tweeted this to you, like I wouldn't have done the show without you. You gave me some confidence, I think, of making a show in Portland that's mostly accessible. Like people, I think it's challenging up here because people want just like the same echo chamber stuff like fed to them. And I think you've made something that's like very accessible to all viewpoints. And
oh, thank you. So I try really hard to do that, but given my hate mail, I don't know that I'm succeeding, although it's from both sides of the spectrum. So maybe that means it's true centrism. Maybe you're right. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love the show. And check it out, obviously, if you haven't checked it out. Rational in Portland. Yeah, so tell me a little bit, like, how and why you started the podcast. Because it's been a while now. You've done a
couple of years. Yeah. So, I mean, I already had all the equipment. I don't even remember why. I know why. Because at the time, it was pre-COVID. And so, I mean, a lot of places have bounced back. I think Portland still really hasn't at all. And one way, in my opinion, that I don't think that we've bounced back is just in regard to being out and about and seeing each other and going to events and doing things and just sort of being around in public. At the time, I was mentoring a lot of new lawyers and I was getting a lot of calls from people who wanted a job. And I would say, I don't have a job for you, but I am happy to meet you for coffee and just talk. And they were really frustrated about graduating from law school and being unemployed. And it was a unsettling number of people who were unemployed. And so I just thought, hey, maybe there's space for this and I could start a podcast and just talk about what you need to think about before you go to law school, what you need to think about when you get out, and what is this phenomenon of unemployment, and maybe have people come on and talk about it. That was sort of how I conceived it. And a lot of it was I just wanted to cut down on my phone traffic. Okay. It was like impeding my work and my time with my family. It was it was too much discretionary time spent on unemployed lawyers or people who wanted to go to law school and were almost out and were realizing their job prospects were not great. And then it just, I had another baby and I got busy and it just kind of sat in a cabinet. And I practiced law with my husband. It just kind of sat in a cabinet. And I remember he said, I'm sorry, but you're never going to do anything with that. All that equipment, just kind of like comments like every time you go into the supply closet, he's like, all this equipment, I don't know what's going to happen with it. And then 2020, it was very isolating. Everybody was very scared here. At least the people I was around, the people I was talking to were very, very scared. Nobody even really wanted to look at each other, even if we were outside. And
it's weird, huh?
It was very weird.
Yeah, like you're right. Like people didn't even want to like acknowledge that there was another person there.
Yeah,
because it was just weird.
It was almost like if I do that, we might have an interaction and get too close, and then I'm going to end up on a vent and die or something. There was this like heaviness in the air about personal interaction, and I'm an extrovert, and it was very difficult on me. And there were a few people that were willing to see me in person and willing to, like, when things started opening up again, willing to go get coffee or something. And it wasn't a lot. It was maybe like 5 or 6. But I just noticed, and it was people who, like me, identified as progressive, and then maybe 1 or 2 centrists. But in general, it was mostly those of us who identified as being pretty progressive people. And we were all saying the same things, like people who voted for Joanne Hardesty, which thankfully I didn't, but people who did, and people who voted for who actually voted for Sarah Yannerum just because they didn't want to vote for Ted Wheeler, and then of course realized their mistake. But all of these kind of people were saying the same things that I was, and it was surprising to me, which was they were asking the same questions, like, do Black people want police defunded? Well, it turns out no. Most of them feel over-policed. We now see the data. We have the data, but they want police. That's why Renee Gonzalez won the most diverse neighborhoods in Portland, east of 205, because they are crime victims, and many of them are minorities who feel over-policed but want police. So now we know, we get it. But at the time, there wasn't any of this data floating around. It was all emotion. It was like defund or abolish, and they're killing Black people. I mean, I think this was prior to the Washington Post's database that you can now go to find out how many Black people are actually killed by police. And it's
because there was a time when that wasn't tracked.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so you had nowhere to go to figure any of this out. But we were all asking those same questions, and there was all this violence every night for 180 plus nights. And it was very disruptive, especially if you live within the city core, which we all do. And I just felt like we were way too close to downtown. I mean, we heard stuff every single night. We would have people marching through the neighborhood at like 1 a.m. and elderly neighbors calling. And I just remember thinking, this is not an MLK thing. I can't put my finger on it, but this is
it's something different.
What is going on at night is unacceptable. But nobody would talk about it except for us, and nobody was listening because nobody else wanted to see us in person, and so they were allowed to talk about it. And I also noticed that, like, on Facebook and things, and by now I was off Facebook because it was so bad for my mental health. But every once in a while it was because it was stuff like, I wanted my kids back in school. And it was stuff, there was stuff on Facebook from people that I liked in a former life that was saying things like, if you want your kids back in school, you're racist and you want everybody to die. I mean, people were saying really crazy things.
They were.
People who I never thought would say crazy things were saying we were all in a bad way. But I just remember trying really hard to stay sane, and that group of friends helped me. And then I was reading a lot, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts, namely like John McWhorter's and Glenn Lowry's on the Glenn Show. And these 2 Black guys, Glenn Lowry is a professor at Brown, economics, and he's educated at MIT, and John McWhorter is a professor of linguistics at Columbia. And McWhorter now has a standing column in the New York Times. At the time, they were considered like fringy people, or as a white Portlander would call them, probably, as someone called Mingus Maps during the ADA settlement testimony when I was there to testify for the disabled people, race traitors. But at the time, it was considered a little fringy to listen to them because they were saying out loud these kinds of things. And that's how I learned about some of this data. And I was sort of thinking, like, we're doing everything wrong. We're not looking at data. We're not polling Black people in Portland. Like, what do they want? We know what Joanne Hardesty wants, but we know what all these white kids in hoodies at night and kids from the suburbs that are coming in want. But what do Black
They want a good time.
Portlanders want? Yeah.
They just want something to do.
Right. And I get it. Like, they were cooped up and they have voids in their life and they needed to fill it. And I don't condone it. I think it was wrong, but I understand what happened, and I understand why they did it. Mostly it was just like, why? And I also noticed, like, on Facebook, there were a lot of people saying really, really crazy things, but they were all progressive crazy things. I didn't think what I was hearing from people like John and Glenn or my friends were crazy. I mean, it was stuff like, why is Ted Wheeler not calling in the feds himself? Why isn't he doing that? Why is Kate Brown quiet? Where is she? Why isn't she out here every night? What's she doing? What does she have to say about all this? Is this okay with them?
Yeah.
Why is this okay? And then Mike Schmidt did his protest policy where he was saying he was not going to prosecute people who were interfering with a police officer or, I mean, things that normally are considered, I don't know, prosecutable offenses. He wasn't going to do it. He considered it part of free speech. And he said something like, hey, I'm mindful of the fact that sometimes, bad things are going to, like, it was sort of like, well, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. Like, if you want real change, things like this are going to happen. And I just remember thinking, no, not this. This is not Selma. Like, this is not the Civil Rights March. This was something, I think you hit on it, Michelle, when you said it was more about kids who were cooped up, who had voids in their lives that needed something to do. And what happened to George Floyd was terrible. And those pictures of everybody laying down on the bridge were beautiful. But what was going on at night was something else. That was not part of a racial justice agenda. And of course, as we all saw, what ends up happening is the police are defunded to the tune of, I mean, everybody lowballs it. If you go back to Joanne's Twitter, she says it herself, $27 million. And she was very proud of that. And so was Wheeler. So were all sorts of people. Newspaper columnists, Steve, is it Dunn?
The Oregonian.
Yeah, he did a column on it.
Yeah.
He did a column about, or no, he had a tweet about how brave Joanne was, and this is what leadership really looks like. And what was so interesting is later, after the police step back and they move away, and they're like, forget it, I'm not working here where nobody appreciates me, and everybody sent a clear signal to me that I'm not wanted here. I mean, I think they were thinking, okay, abolish the police. Is if it comes somewhere, it's coming here, and I got to feed my kids, and I'm out of here. They all take off. We've got one of the lowest police forces, lowest number of police forces in the country. And then later, Steve writes this column in the Oregonian about the poor Chinese garden and why they can't get any law enforcement around there to protect it. And I just remember thinking, well, Steve, you didn't see this coming? Right. I mean, it just was weird. But my friends and I did, but they weren't talking about it. And I was like, this is garbage. I should have actually stayed on Facebook longer, because I learned later through Kim McGarr and Renee Gonzalez that they had an open schools movement. And Leslie Beenan was part of this. It was of influential, very thoughtful, very smart Portlanders who were trying to get schools open, and they did. And it was them that did it. Yeah. They did it, and
he was later attacked for that when he was running.
Yeah. That's right. And they did it under their own names. Yeah. And they were super naive when they started, and they got flack, and their kids got flack, and they're still getting it. But I should have stayed on. I should have seen what they were doing. And I didn't, because all I heard was craziness. And then I heard quiet whispers in my backyard. And I just thought somebody has to say something. And so I just got all the podcast equipment out of the office and started recording. And I had a neighbor friend. She wouldn't come on as herself. And actually she had said, I don't want to say our names. And she said, I don't want you to say your name. She has a job that she wanted to protect and a family that she wanted to protect. And at the time, this was pre-Renee's win. This was Kim and Renee and Leslie are the brave people. And they're really the people that we should be applauding, because from day one, they were out there saying really unpopular things that turned out to be correct, which is the kids need to be in school and they're not going to do well. The longer they're kept out of school, the worse they're going to do, which all turned out to be true. They were exactly right. Leslie's a scientist. She understood the data. She's still she is working with a group called the Norfolk Group, trying to do this post-mortem on COVID and trying to lobby Congress to get that done. Of course, I don't know that they will. But anyway, they got it. And I should have been brave from the beginning. I'm very ashamed that I wasn't. I should have just come out and said, I'm Kristin Olson. This is what I think. This is what we should do. Because now I understand that our issue, I think, in Portland is that we have this, what Renee calls a silent majority. And I think we still have it. And I know it's a majority because he was elected. Julia Brim Edwards was elected to Multnomah County Commission. The capital gains tax failed. I do think there is a silent majority, but I think more, as TJ Browning says, she's the public safety chair from the Laurelhurst neighborhood, more good people have to speak out and have to say, my name is, this is what I do. I'm a lawyer. I think this. And then people suddenly have permission to talk about normal things and look at data and bring it into the fold instead of being terrified about being canceled. And look, if you're still terrified about being canceled, I get it. Cancellation is real. It's sure.
It's terrible. It's like damning on us that people are terrified to say anything.
Well, it is. And so what ended up happening was, so I was Karen, and we were joking that my neighbor was Mitch McConnell because, and I just see him like, at the time I saw him as like a perfect example of GOP conservatism that I couldn't stand. And so our joke was in Portland, anywhere else, like we would still be considered progressive, but in Portland we're considered Mitch McConnell right-wing GOP wackadoos.
That's funny. My neighbor said something similar.
It was true.
He's a progressive Democrat, and he's like, everyone, compared to everyone here, I'm basically right-wing. Like, because I say maybe we should not like defund the police, or maybe we should prosecute crimes.
Renee Gonzalez is a Democrat. He has a photo with Biden and his wife. His wife is from South America. He's Mexican. He is a Democrat. He voted for Tina Kotek. He's very outspoken about all of this. Tina Kotek is I think still the most unpopular governor in America. She is one of the most hated governors in the United States, and she is seen as an example of insanity. And yet here we have this man on city council who's called a racist Republican who is proud of voting for her. I mean, this is the crazy city that we live in. But now, so I was Karen, she was Mitch McConnell, and then Renee came on, and I just remember he was sitting across from me and he said, so I'm supposed to call you Karen, right? And I just thought, no. I was like, no, you should just call me Kristin, and that's who I am, and that's who I'm going to be, because this is wrong, and you are sticking your neck out, and you have been who you are throughout this entire thing, from open schools movement to here. Now you're running for city council. You're getting all this garbage from these Joanne supporters, really personal attacks. Parody accounts, Republican Renee website.
The amount of hate.
He's a white supremacist.
Yeah. Like, just getting, like, before even being elected, I'm sure the amount of hate stuff he got was
he has Mexican
through the
farm
roof.
workers in his family.
He had
like,
to
it
have
was
really heavy security at his victory party. I was there that night.
I know, he hired Echelon.
Antifa was like milling around in the park blocks waiting to do something, but they had such good security.
they were taking photos of me and posting them on Twitter, and I ended up getting them taken down. But the other thing is, what happened afterwards is that they made good on that promise, and once everybody left that party, there was mayhem. There were windows broken. There were fires set. Fortunately, PBB was ready to go.
And not to mention, like,
Nathan prosecuted that guy who set those fires. He's from like Damascus or something.
Well, I was just gonna say, I remember
he's not even from here.
Leading up to his win, I think they smashed his office like a couple
They
times.
did. His office is right next door to mine.
Yeah. His
windows were always broken.
Yeah.
Always.
Several
and
times.
I just remember when he was sitting across from me thinking, I'm an embarrassment and I should be ashamed of myself. And I actually told him, I'm really ashamed of myself. I should have just used my name all along like you've been doing, and I didn't do that, and that was wrong. And I really appreciate what you're doing, Renee. And so from here on forward, that's how it's going to be. And that's how it's been. And it's been, I mean, my house hasn't burned down yet. It's still time, I'm sure. But whatever. I'm just at the point where I don't really care. And it turns out there is this silent majority, because what happens? He gets elected, which, by the way, was unheard of in 2020. Mm-hmm. There was this weird, and I don't think the majority of Portlanders were behind Joanne Hardesty's defunding of the police. I don't think that they were. I think there was terror throughout the city about being seen as a racist. Mm-hmm. And Renee talked on the podcast about what it's like to be Mexican and to have, farm people like manual laborers and farm workers in his family, and to be called a white supremacist in the city of Portland as a personal attack, and how to just power through that. Because
very overused.
If you call yourself a progressive, it is overused, and it doesn't have a meaning anymore.
It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So now, when people say white supremacist in Portland, you might think, oh, Renee Gonzalez, but everybody else is thinking David Duke, Richard Spencer. Mm-hmm. Renee Gonzalez is he is Mexican. This Orwellian stuff that is going on in the city of Portland, that speech starts to sink in. And actually, sometimes I forget that he's Latino. Like, I forget to mention that. Like, I'll listen to some progressive just go off on him about something he did that they didn't like taking tents and tarps away from Portland street response. And I'll explain to them that the reason he did that is because it was very, very dangerous, because they were also being handed out propane heaters. It was causing fires. It was using up firefighter resources. And these people on the street were being burned alive. It was inhumane to pass out tents and tarps. We have shelters. We always open the gyms anytime there's an ice storm, anytime. I mean, we can set up a shelter in 2 seconds. That's part of what's so weird about this city. Like, everybody's talking about how Jessica Vega Peterson in the county keeps talking about how we don't have this infrastructure. It's expensive and all these, and it's just like, you guys, every time there's an ice storm, you set up a shelter in 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. There's a gym somewhere. Suddenly it's a shelter. I mean, this isn't hard to do, and it's not expensive. We just refuse to do it. But anyway,
I wanted to point out too, like, because you've had Tiana on your show,
Tiana
the whole tent program was just like, there was no tracking of any of that stuff, and like they just spent a lot of money on untrackable like assets, and then just gave them away with no.
How is it more expensive to open a gym than it is to buy a bunch of camping supplies and hand them out?
I mean, I think they would say it can't be a shelter forever. If it's going to be, it's never good enough. It's just a way to push this housing first narrative. So they're just going to dodge it. It's really just a way to explain to you why shelter just isn't enough. It's just not good enough. Like Tina Kotek, like, housing is a public good. Yeah. Everybody deserves a house. So we're not even going to go down that road about shelters, etc. Everybody deserves a house. Everybody deserves a pod with an air conditioner in it. They deserve to be able to do drugs in that pod with their air conditioner. And frankly, I think this air conditioner thing is, which is, by the way, a nonprofit is very handsomely paid to hand those out. I don't know what they know about, Verity knows about air conditioners, but they're paid well to do it. Why couldn't you just bid that out to somebody who installs air conditioners?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking a couple things about what you were just saying.
That's totally off topic.
No,
but
it's okay.
It's obnoxious.
Like,
it's a waste of money.
We're gonna get into all this stuff, I'm sure, but yeah, I was just gonna say, like, you, I think, totally successfully captured like that audience, because that's like I said, that's probably why I started listening to your show. I am still to this day a registered Democrat.
I am too. I mean, if you want to say, we have closed primaries.
Yeah.
If you want to say, I mean, I know like commissioners of the county, city council, nonpartisan, mayor, nonpartisan. But if you want to say in local legislators or national legislators, or like, for instance, I wanted to be able to vote for Tobias Reed over Tina Kotek. I can't give up my Democratic registration. Then I can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was going to say that, and also just going back to the Renee election stuff, like, I just wanted to point out, like, the double standard of, like, people who today scream about fairness in elections and all that stuff, and then here in Portland we have candidates who, like, if you want to run and they don't like you, they'll just destroy your office multiple times. And
yeah,
like, how is that an open election?
Like, they try to drive you out with pitchforks and fires.
If they don't like what you're saying, they don't want to, like, kind of put you out of the race or try to.
It's a bully city. Like, we just bully people.
I just wanted to point out.
It's allowed.
Yeah, it's very undemocratic.
Yeah.
Right. And all they talk about is, understandably and totally credibly, January 6th and election deniers like Trump, which totally, I mean, that's a threat to democracy. We've never had a president who has refused a peaceful transition of power and just refused to admit that he lost in the way that he did. And that was completely insane and unacceptable.
I thought Al Gore didn't
I think Al Gore's is different. Al Gore had arguments about why the voting should have been counted a certain way, and he went through the Supreme Court, and it was a conservative Supreme Court. He was not going to win that he wasn't going to win, but he had an argument.
He argued too. This is what I'm saying.
But he had so the Supreme Court doesn't have to take that case. They have certiorari, which means they get to pick what cases they take. They took that case because he had a good argument. Trump did not have a good argument. In fact, like, his lawyers are under, some of them are under investigation. I mean, his lawyers were making arguments that most lawyers think are extremely laughable. They would not have made it. There was no path to the Supreme Court for Donald Trump.
Well, and what you're saying is basically, like,
even with this conservative court, no way.
Well, and what you're saying is, like, if that's a valid election integrity concern, this also should be, like the thing that I just pointed out.
It's undemocratic to harass and criminally intimidate people out of running for office.
Candidates, yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah,
and we never call that out.
Yeah, that's kind of my gripe with Portland, is that it's always one way, Yeah. There's never criticism pointed at. And I was thinking too, like, one of the reasons I think your show was so successful was, and my take on this might be a little old, but the last time I was working in TV news here, the podcasts they were making were like murder, what do you call it? Like murder porn, like they would find some cold case and like make a whole podcast.
I do like those.
And people like them. They're popular. But I'm just saying, there's this whole plethora of political stuff going on throughout 2020, 2021 that I didn't hear them make podcasts about that stuff. So I think you successfully capitalized on,
because nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, because the local media was not.
And there's still this, I mean, what's sad is there is still this vacuum in local media. There is too much. The reality is there's too much going on in Oregon. Now there's this Val Hoyle stuff. There's too much going on in Oregon. There's too much going on in Portland for our outlets. I mean, even as more data driven as they become and less ideological, I think, as they become, even the Oregonian. I mean, they endorse Renee. I think as more of them are waking up and realizing that, hey, you know what, actually the people that are buying this media, the people that can afford to like subscribe to the Oregonian, they have jobs and they're voting for people like Renee. They're not voting for Sarah Iannarone. They don't want an Antifa mayor. I think they're starting to wake up and realize, hey, this stuff that we're saying, that these other people are saying that we're hearing out here is actually, that is popular. That is what people want to hear. And I think they're covering it more. It's just too much. It's too much to cover. So there is this vacuum, and I can't fill it. I mean, thank God for you. There should be more. We would need 1,000 podcasters and newspapers and, frankly, all forms of media, Substacks, to really keep up on what's going on around here.
When I think it's my dog's moaning. I think it's moving in that direction, and it's definitely one of the reasons I started the show. Is just like, I worked for a long time in local media, but you can kind of see that deflating. Like, they just, first of all, like, there's no eyeballs on TV like back in the day. Like, I was kind of in the heyday of that back in the day, but the only reason people watch now is for live sports or weather. Like, those are
that's exactly
the two
right.
things where they still make money. And election years, which next year is a huge one, they'll pull in a lot of money from those. But yeah, it's just like, I still feel like they totally dropped the ball on a lot of these issues, and it's like they should be the first ones talking about these. It's right in their backyard. This is their primary goal as a news organization, is to tell you what's going on in your own neighborhood and your city. And a lot of times sometimes they'll report on stuff, but kind of make it kind of obfuscate the details. And a lot of that stuff I'm talking about is like Antifa related. Like, they'll just say protesters. They won't.
A group came.
They won't identify them as a group. And as somebody who's like been attacked while on the job for local news, it's definitely a thing. Like, all the photographers that I work with are aware of it. They're scared of it. You go to Timbers, like, nobody wanted to cover Timbers games because of the huge Antifa presence there. But
really?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if like MLS soccer, but they have an actual seating section where they all sit, and they have signs,
but they're not real.
When I was actually working for Channel 8, I covered this. They had banned the Antifa symbol, which is 3 arrows. They were kind of diagonal.
Okay.
Because they normally have tons of flags up at the games.
Timbers banned the symbol?
The MLS banned it, but they backpedaled quickly because of all the hate that they got from, I'm guessing, these groups. But
news didn't want to cover Timbers games because there was animosity between Antifa and the news.
Yeah, like they generally just don't.
They don't want to be filmed.
Yes. And so
that's what that was about.
So even at a soccer game, they would, they cover the cameras and shove photographers and stuff. And luckily, I didn't deal with a lot of that. I dealt with more of like the straight up news stuff. Like, I covered, I don't know if you remember Sean Keeler's death.
Yeah.
But I was covering that, and I got hassled quite a bit. But yeah, that was kind of started my journey on this path of like.
How did they? So you were covering it as the camera person?
Yeah.
How did they even find out who you were?
I mean, they didn't. I was just there, and they didn't want me there.
Oh, you mean personally, physically in the space?
Yes.
I was for some reason I was thinking online, but you're saying like personally, physically in that space. They didn't want. Yeah. They don't want. It's weird. I think. So is what's going on is that they want to cover themselves on social media.
Well, they want to
on their media.
They want to control the narrative, of whatever they're doing, and I've been at events where they're there and they just like, no, we don't want you here, and it was just shocking to me. This is like 2019, but it was shocking to me at the time of just like, because I'm a big free press person.
Yeah, and they weren't being covered unfavorably. Like, for a very long time, they were.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember defending them to a friend of mine who she was right all along, but. I remember her saying this Antifa stuff. It was Trump era, but it was pre 2020. And there were, so, and like Nathan Vasquez says, Antifa's looking for a fight, the far right looking for a fight. Antifa's here, some live in the suburbs, but some are here. But they'll make this their home base anyway for all those fights. And then they draw in the far right. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was some footage of somebody from the far right coming at somebody. And it was not, I mean, none of these people are people I would want to associate with. But this particular person looked particularly scary and how Nazi and swastika tattoos. It was like coming at a person of color, and Antifa sort of stepped in front of them. And I just saw that clip, and I was talking to my friend about it, again, this is like, I don't know, 2018, 2019, maybe even earlier. And she was saying this Antifa stuff is really bad news, and there's too many of them, and they're too violent. And I said, well, I saw this, and I appreciated that. I mean, in that sense, I think I think at least that message of white supremacists aren't welcome here. I enjoy that message. And I think that's part of why they do well in Portland.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
That's part of why they still have a presence, albeit much tinier, because I think a lot of people are upset about what they did to the city for so long. But I think there's still a footprint and it's anti-fascist. Like, it's marketed really well.
Yeah.
Proud Boy it's bad. It sounds bad. I understand the etymology from Gavin McInnes, and I've heard that Joe Rogan episode, and I get it. It was supposed to sound bad. It was never supposed to be marketed as some kind of movement. Antifa sounds good. We're anti-fascist. I just remember at the time thinking, yeah, that sounds right. I mean, at the time, if I heard somebody like Sarah Ann around say, I'm anti-fascist, I'd be like, now I hear people say, I'm anti-fascist, and I just back away.
Yeah,
Isn't that crazy? Now it sounds like, okay, well, I don't want to be associated with you.
Yeah, it's extreme.
Which, every phrase has been ruined.
Well,
I don't know, everything is wrong now.
It's funny because I work with younger people, and I had, like, a couple years ago, this younger guy was like, oh, it just means anti-fascist. Why would you be against that? And I think around the same 2-week period, Biden had just got reelected. What am I saying? Elected.
Yeah, and they destroyed the Democratic headquarters.
And they were it broke their brain. And they're like, why would they do that? And I'm like, well, they don't like either candidate.
They're anarchists.
Yes. So it's just interesting. It broke their brain of why would anti-fascists destroy the?
Well, oddly, it seems as though they want to be the police, even though they don't want them to exist. They want to be the.
I think that's exactly right.
They want to
it's about control and power.
They want to be in power, and yeah.
I could talk to them for a long time, but I want to move on to Portland 2024, just election stuff. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever. It's your show.
Because just this week, because this episode will probably come out in a couple days, but Ted Wheeler said he's not going to run again. So let's start there. I know Mingus, right, has said he's going to run.
Mingus is running.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm just curious your take, on how that. I'm guessing Sarah might jump in, or I don't know who's going to jump in.
I don't know. I actually don't know who's. I have no idea who's. Okay. No, I do know. Well, I don't know. I think Carmen Rubio might.
Okay.
Dan Ryan has expressed. So for a while, everybody was expressing interest on city council. I don't think Wheeler was ever serious. I think he was trying to. I think he was concerned about his legacy, and he wanted to keep that idea up that he might just run again. And this fiction of, hey, I could totally win this. And if I just really have some confidence and project that I believe that, maybe enough people will give me some kind of untarnished legacy to remember me by, which unfortunately I don't think he will be successful in that.
Yeah.
No.
So then he drops out. I think he did know he was not going to win. And then especially with Mingus, not just running, but Mingus has been campaigning for a while now. And he's already raised, he's already gotten 200. Well, this isn't, so I want to put in just a little plug for him and Sanity in Portland here for a minute, because he wants to be part of the small donor matching for the election, which is very smart, which he should do. And, Joanne was always talking in her race against Renee Gonzalez. Joanne Hardesty for city council she was the incumbent, and she was talking about how, Renee is just funded by rich people and developers, and I'm funded by little people that give $1 or $5. And it turned out he raised more small donor matching money than Joanne did by, I think, a lot. So that's smart. Mingus needs to participate in that. And the fact is, there are a lot of people, 205, 82nd, there are people in East County, in East Portland, that want to vote for Mingus because he enjoys law and order and they're besieged by crime. And that's why they voted for Renee, I think, in such heavy numbers. He has been campaigning for a while, but he only has, I think he needs 750 people to give $5 or more. He's only had 250.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he needs this by the end of the year.
Okay.
And we're already in September.
So
we're halfway through September.
He's not
so
halfway.
If you're interested at all, in Mingus Maps and you like anything that he's doing, and if you think, like I do, that he's one of the good people on city council who's doing good things for our city, please consider going to his website and just Google Mingus Maps. His website will pop up. Go to the donate button and give him $5. It's $5. Like, just buy Mingus a cup of coffee. Because even if you ultimately don't want to vote for him, somebody might jump in that you like better. But let's get him into the race because Dan Ryan may run. Carmen Rubio has expressed the most interest. I think Mingus would be a far better mayor. I think Carmen may not have trouble drumming up. I mean, these fringe left people seem to like her at that Americans for Disability Act settlement. I think it was the camping ban testimony. Somebody, I mean, it was infiltrated by crazy people. I still don't understand why they kicked a lot of people out, but it was bizarre how much they allowed and how long they allowed these unhinged people to talk. But somebody I don't even know if they were scheduled to testify, but they had stood up, and there's video of this, and they said, F you, F you, F you, Carmen Rubio, you're okay, F you, to city council. So if you want, I think that person would probably give Carmen Rubio $5. If you think that Mingus Maps is probably going to better represent your beliefs compared to Carmen Rubio, please go to his website and buy him a coffee, even if ultimately you don't want to vote for him, because I just think we need more sanity in our politics, especially with this charter thing coming down the pike that nobody seems to understand, including myself. And
oh, dang, we were hoping you would explain it to us.
No, you definitely know more than us.
I don't know who else is going to run, but I do think it is unsettling to me how small this window of time is that Mingus has. 250 people is less than half of what he needs by December 10th.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, yeah.
So,
well, you've inspired me. Maybe I'll do it because
it's just $5.
No, but I understand what you're saying. I was just thinking about that. Like, it is a weird threshold. First of all, like, every candidate has to meet that.
Yeah,
to be on the ballot.
to be part of the small donor matching program.
Gotcha. Okay, I see.
Yeah, and you want that because we have an outsized. Like, I think poor candidates should be able to run. I like that. I think taxpayer money should match small dollars. I think that's good, but we go way too far and we match it by like 9. So you can your $5 when he qualifies will turn into $45.
Wow.
I am dead serious.
Jeez.
And that is why charter's costing so much money because we've got all these people who are going to be on charter. They're all going to be trying to participate in small donor matching. And now the taxpayers are funding their campaigns.
That is pretty wild. So you're multiplying that, there's 12.
By 9.
9, okay. Yeah.
If it's under the threshold. And I don't remember, but it's a small amount.
But I'm saying.
And it begins at $5.
I understand that, but I'm saying you also multiply that by seats, right?
That's exactly right.
So 12 commissioners.
Yes, and that's why when the commission was saying, well, we think it's going to cost about this much money, the rest of us were doing the math just on the small donor matching piece and going, that doesn't even cover the taxpayer money that's going to go to funding their campaigns.
Yeah, that is pretty
and
wild.
Subsidizing them.
Because see, this is, I'm so glad you're explaining this because, this is the first time I've heard this, and like, yeah, I don't know. It makes me think of like 401k matching programs, but even more.
Oh, even more.
Yeah, like
it is wild,
and that's all taxpayer money. Yeah,
it comes out of taxpayer funds. Yes, it's government funded, and so the idea is like if you have pennies, and this is right. It's a good idea. You should be able to run against the timber scions like Ted Wheeler. You should, and I agree. But 9 is a lot.
Yeah. Like there's merit to the idea. This is just way too much.
Yeah, I mean, we should have cut the commissioners down by a lot. And by the way, they're not even working full time. They're not in charge of bureaus anymore. We should have cut the number of commissioners down by a lot, or cut that matching amount, because this is going to be.
Yeah.
It's going to be so much money.
Costly.
At the end of the day, when we're adding this tab up, it's going to blow everybody's minds.
Because I was just thinking I have heard people on the show complain about just, because I think the salaries are going up in general. And
they are going up.
And then you multiply that by 12, and then
that's exactly
you also
right.
have this matching thing, so it all adds up to a lot of money.
And look, like, I think the salary should go up. Why was Renee able to give up a successful business and run for city council? Well, I mean, for one thing, he can't practice law. He had to give up his law license, at least temporarily. He does have another business, but he can't run that. He's too busy running all of his bureaus. And I mean, if you go to his social media, he's with BOAC and he is a good commissioner for his bureaus. He is with BOAC and the firefighters nearly every single day, and they love him, and I get it. He takes care of his bureaus. He's doing he's doing his job. So he doesn't have time to run a business, but it's not a lot of money. He took a huge pay cut to do it, and not everybody can do that. I mean, unless you're independently wealthy or this is a step up for you. And I don't know. I mean, do we want poor people on city council? Of course we do. Do we want only renters like Chloe Udali on city council? Probably not. We probably need some people who are successful in business.
Have leadership.
Like maybe at least one of them would
leadership
be good.
skills.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not saying like Chloe clearly had leadership skills because she was able to do a fair amount of damage that we're going to be paying for a very long time. So
well, you're saying fiscally.
Yeah, I mean, look, we should
responsible.
have a mix of people, and how do we attract those people who aren't Ted Wheeler timber scions, but who aren't bookstore owners and renters way down here? Is there, like, can we bring in anybody from the middle?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, you have to increase salaries to do that, but don't have that many commissioners.
Right.
It's just too expensive, and it's too many people. I mean, even now, there is just so much energy that goes into trying to figure out who's running for city council. And we don't have that many councilors.
Yeah, well, and I thought you were going to say, like, you see the gridlock now. Because it's challenging enough already with 4.
Yes.
And, like, when we have 12, like, it just seems... Like, I haven't talked to one person that's actually excited about the new commission. But
have you talked to anybody who voted for it? And do you have an explanation of why?
Yeah.
What is with the measures that we get to vote for anyway? Like, how is it so easy to get stupid stuff like this to pass?
It's not easy. It took a lot of money, and they had it. But
people vote for it, and then we have to do it.
Well, I think
but nobody knows what's going on.
What happens is, they take that money and use it to make it look very appealing.
Yes.
And people just
but then we don't know how we're going to implement any of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, now we have to do it because...
But it passed by so many people voted for it. So have you talked to anybody, I don't know, on this show or not, about what that seems to have voters' remorse about this and what they were thinking?
I don't think I have. Because this was, 2 years ago when it was on the ballot?
Last November.
Yeah, it was not even that 2 years ago, yeah. I definitely haven't. I did not vote for it. But yeah, I would talk to somebody who...
So what people tell me is they thought that Mingus's alternative would pop up. Like he would bring forward a piece of legislation in city council, and do it that way. Because you can do you can gather a bunch of signatures, or somebody on city council can put something forward. And he had said... And I tried on my show to make this loud and clear, and had multiple people on to say this repeatedly. And I had house parties to explain this to people. Apparently not enough. He was not going to do that, and he didn't. Okay. He kept his promise, and he said, I'm not going to put an alternative on the ballot if the voters vote in November for charter reform, because they've spoken,
right,
and I'm going to respect that, and I'm not going to try to fix it. Then there's this outcry to try to fix it, and there's a ton of vitriol directed at him about why he didn't do what he needed to do to give us some kind of alternative. And I think the other thing that I've heard is, maybe not Mingus putting forth his plan, but just city council. They'll look at it, they'll figure it out, they'll put forth some stuff to try to fix it. Well, Renee tried to do that, and all the commissioners showed up. I think a lot of the people who have buyer's remorse about charter reform, and a lot of the people who knew that this was a terrible plan. I mean, part of our problem in this majority is most of us have jobs and we don't have time to go to city council and sit with the charter commission, almost all of whom works for some nonprofit or another that's being funded by city, county, metro, by the way, or has a connection to those people. I mean, if you look at the people on the charter commission, there's a reason normal people like Vadim Mazirsky, by normal, I mean, people who more clearly represent the majority of Portlanders like Vadim Mazirsky and Alyssa Pishka resigned from the Charter Commission, realized this is moving in a direction I want nothing to do with, and it was predetermined how this was going to go. If you look at who's on there, I mean, essentially, that was back when City Council had turned the keys to the city over to Joanne Hardesty. Those are the people who were on the Police Accountability Commission. Those are the people who were on the Charter Commission. They are the far left of Portland that I think had a great run. Great. And we're going to be dealing with what y'all have passed for a very long time. You were extremely successful. Thank you and goodbye. Now I think we're trying to usher in some kind of balance. We cannot do that with this charter measure. And I think that was the whole point of it. And so but that's the issue. Like those of us who are in the majority and frankly, the Renee voters in the really diverse neighborhoods, that's like mama working 3 jobs. She has to go home to her kids. She doesn't work from home. She can't just go to city council for hours and testify about why charter reform doesn't make sense. And she doesn't even have time to learn about charter reform.
I think like probably the majority of people who voted for it are just the average kind of low information voter who's sitting at home with their ballot and they're like, oh, well,
our government is screwed up.
That's different. We like being revolutionary and weird and nobody's done this before. So yeah, let's do it. Like we're Portland. We can do anything.
I actually think they don't even, I actually, based on the people I've talked to who voted for it, I don't even think they saw it that way. I think the rationale was our form of government is messed up, which it is.
It is, yeah.
We don't have geographical representation, which we want. Now, people wanted all of these things separated out. So one of the arguments was, why aren't the charter commissioners giving us a choice to vote for more commissioners, geographic representation? Because there were certain parts of this charter commission plan that were very popular, that Mingus was incorporating into his plan, like geographic representation. That was popular. Single transferable vote, that in my opinion, is undemocratic and nobody understands it. Nobody can explain it. And I think it was just a way to shoehorn in fringe candidates. And that was on purpose because some of these people are running and were going to run for city council. And I think they will announce if they haven't already. A few have. So I think that what happened is people thought, hey, our form of government is really screwed up. This sounds good. We get geographic representation, more city councilors. How could that be bad? Now I have 3 people who are accountable to me as opposed to 1 who can just ignore my emails. I've got 3 numbers I can call. And I think people were just like, yeah, our form of government screwed up. I'm just going to vote for this. That sounds right.
And it is true, like, because we reported on this a lot in the news when I worked for it about how antiquated the old commission form is. And I pointed out earlier in an episode of like, that's the problem is I think everyone accepts that that's an issue with how we run Portland. And we just jumped on the first available solution.
Yeah.
Without rationale, without thinking about it. And that's just something a pattern I see in Portland of like being that progressive. We're going to accept the first change no matter what.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Right. No matter what's underneath
we just want to vote yes.
Big change.
If it's a change, we're like, yep, we're doing it. You know?
Yeah, so, I think that's right.
So it's a hard thing. Like, I don't know. I feel like whoever came up with that first thing on the ballot, no matter what, they would have got through. That's kind of how I feel, but I don't know.
I just think it's a shame that there was the alternative wasn't presented. The argument is, so, Ulysses PAC, which was Mingus's organization, he ran on charter reform. That's part of how he got elected to city council. Their argument was we didn't have time. So what was going on behind the scenes is the charter commission is being stacked with these, in my opinion, fringe people who want to create a totally bizarre, again, in my opinion, undemocratic system. And they were working on this long ago.
Okay.
They were working on this before they Vadim talks about this when he came on my podcast, Rational in Portland. Vadim talks specifically about this. And he says, look, because he was a charter commissioner until he resigned. And he said, I've got on there and I looked around and he's like, I realized these people have set these wheels in motion long ago. They've had all this time to figure this out. In the meantime, there's money coming in from other institutions from out of state.
I was going to ask,
Sightline from Seattle.
Is this another one of the experiments where people
Yes,
are
it
paying
is.
to
We're a guinea pig.
Outside
I hate
money.
that.
And they all know we're idiotic enough to vote for this crap.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I was trying to think of like a Vegas analogy, but it's like it's like the highest risk like table. Like these donors come in and just like, we'll try it here in Portland. Like,
Let's do it here first and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a bad
Obviously,
analogy.
it's going
try
great.
it in your town.
Yeah.
I
Everything
don't
they've
see any
done
of
is
these people
great.
trying it in their town.
Yeah. I actually didn't know too about. I didn't really know anything about the charter the people planning that.
Oh, yeah, that was going on for a long time. And then finally, when Vadim started speaking out, Alyssa started speaking out, and people finally started listening. Like at first it was sort of like, well, who's this disability law judge? Who's this woman who teaches at Portland State? I don't know. What are they saying? They're resigning. Why? What's going on? There's some infighting with the Charter Commission. By the time everybody caught up as to why, and Alyssa and Vadim had formed their No on Charter PAC, their Common Sense Government PAC. And I think finally by the time Ulysses had their stuff together and were figuring out, can we get something together fast enough to get on the ballot to compete with Charter? I think they were all realizing, no, we're way behind. We haven't done the listening sessions. We haven't done the polling. We haven't done, I think they were internally freaking out. And so their campaigns, there were two of them they were semi-aligned. Mingus had a sketch of a plan. No on Charter was just sort of no. Partnership for Common Sense Government. Vadim's PAC was more just vote no on this. But that's a negative message, right? Portlanders, like you said, they want a yes. They want to vote yes. They don't want negative messaging about what to not vote for. That is not sexy or fun. No. Yeah. And what's sexy and fun is switching it up and changing up the government that none of us like.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's always, at least seems this way, it's always sold as a positive change, but we don't really think about how we're going to pay for it, how we're going to get there.
Well, that's boring. Those are details.
Yeah, right.
How we're going to pay for it. I think most of the people who voted for it are just I don't know, you guys can pay for it.
Yeah. And that's the classic, promising to voters, just hey, free money,
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter. It's just
the free preschool that nobody's using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we move on to, we kind of got into this a little bit, but what do you see as the top issues for the election next year? We talked a little bit before.
It's obviously drugs and homelessness and crime.
We talked before the show about 110, and I'm just curious your take on that, because we were talking a little about, you kind of agree with Ben West in his
Yeah, well, Ben and I are members of a national and Canadian, so a North American coalition called North America Recovers, that was just sort of, the bones of it were conceived of by a guy named Michael Schellenberger, who wrote a book called San Francisco and ran for governor of California, and a woman named Andrea Suarez, who was just on my podcast, Rational in Portland, We Heart Seattle, and they just came together and decided we really need to look. The far left has, at least when we're talking about West Coast cities, Michael Schellenberger's in San Francisco, Andrea's in Seattle, I'm in Portland. We're talking about all these cities. The far left is very organized. And those of us who are in this, as Renee would call it, silent majority, the people who are just kind of keeping their heads down and working and don't have time to go to commission and city council meetings, are not organized, and we are not talking to each other. We don't have 501c3s with C4 arms. There's a PAC floating around here and there. There's a People for Portland. There's a Ulysses PAC. There's a Partnership for Common Sense Government. But like I said, two of those, their message was vote no on charter. That's not going to sell with Portlanders. People for Portland is more of a like raising, I mean, they seem to be more like raising awareness about policies and people behind them that might not be great for the city. But there's no one's coalesced under this. Nobody's saying I'm aligned with People for Portland. We do have the former Portland Party, which is now, and I want to get this right. Is it Future Portland? I'm going to feel so bad if I get it wrong.
You can look it up. I was curious, but you were saying like
Future Portland. We now have former Portland Party, which is now Future Portland. They are that. I think this was when they were just getting their sea legs, and the idea was, hey, like, and also Future Portland is local. This was more, hey, throughout America, there are other people who think like us that live in, that still call themselves progressives, used to call themselves progressive, like Schellenberger used to. I think Andrea still does. I think I've just recently finally abandoned it, but in general, at one point identified as progressive and live in these mostly bright blue cities like BC, Vancouver, Canada, Austin, Texas, Seattle. I mean, those kind of places. So like a couple people in our coalition rolled back the camping ordinance in Austin. So for a minute there, you could do what we've allowed for years, and you could just set up a tent on a sidewalk in Austin, and then they looked around and realized that was idiotic. And a couple people from Save Austin Now are part of our North America Recovers Coalition. Mm-hmm. So Andrea and Michael Schellenberger conceived of it. We got together for a retreat in Seattle last year. This is only like a year old, last year. And then we have a website called NorthAmericaRecovers.org. And we just put together sort of what we want, what our policies will look like. And they look like things like not Measure 110, not the decriminalization of drugs like fentanyl, heroin, etc. And a lot of the people in this coalition are formerly homeless, like Tom Wolfe and Grant Denton, both of whom have been on my podcast. They're people who work with homeless people, like Andrea, Kevin Dahlgren Kevin Dahlgren's in Portland, who do outreach with people on the street and have done that every single day for years and know what people are struggling with. There are people like me who have a sister who's a homeless opioid addict and a dad who was homeless and is now dead. I think those of us that have that lived experience have a story to tell, and for whatever reason, because we're working, we're busy, etc., that story has gotten lost in the stuff like the Measure 110 campaign, which passed by a lot. And frankly, I voted for it. Yeah. I mean, I remembered thinking, okay, I like this Portugal model. This will reclassify drug crimes. And really what I wanted to see is some intervention. And I wanted to see people like my sister get into detox and rehab. Mm-hmm. And the Drug Policy Alliance, who sold us 110, was very smart in putting together that legislation. Again, this is outside money coming into Portland, using us as a guinea pig. I don't see people like George Soros or the Drug Policy Alliance, which is based in New York, doing this in their cities or where they live. But they sold this to us. We bought it by a lot. And I think we were all hoping for with those majority of us who voted for it, we're hoping for things like I was, which is, how do I get my family member into rehab? Mm-hmm. How do I compel some form of assistance? Because in a lot of these cities, there's a fair amount of libertarian attitude about the right to use drugs and do what you want, no matter what, even if it interferes. I mean, it's really not libertarian because it interferes with the rights of others. And the idea is there is a section of society to whom everything is given and nothing is required. And these addicts slumped out on the street fall into that category. But I think those of us in North America Recovers, like Ben West and me, believe that is not compassion. No. That what is compassion is intervention. If need be, mandatory drug treatment, bringing back drug court for crimes that are not Measure 11 crimes. Mm-hmm. Right now, Mike Schmidt has drug court for Measure 11 crimes. Those are the most serious crimes you can commit. Nathan Vasquez talked about that when he came on my podcast, Rational in Portland, he specifically said, the people that are getting drug court now, I mean, Kevin Barton was appalled. He's the DA of Washington County. He also came on. Kevin explained, like, the people who are getting drug court now in Multnomah County should not be out on the streets. These are really violent, scary people that need to be incapacitated. We hear about them all the time.
Yeah.
They're slashing throats. They're eating scalps off of people.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like third world country stuff happening out here.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
They literally, so like last night I did a podcast late, and I only do these with a man, and we were coming downtown, we were coming out of my building, and already there's like 10 people setting up shop. There's a huge mattress outside blocking the vestibule that we have to step over. And fortunately, he's like not a small person and is relatively, I don't know, he must have looked intimidating, because there was a group of guys really eyeing us. And I have my computer bag, I have my handbag. I kind of had too much going on, and probably, I mean, I know I could have easily been taken down. But these guys and Don kind of had like a staring match as we walked past them and navigated around them. But it's dark out. No one is around except these people, criminals. I mean, public intoxication is still illegal. It is. I mean, we know if you go to PPB Central Bike Squad's Instagram, which by the way is the most fire account on Instagram, we know that people who are, I mean, just get on there, these people who are smoking fentanyl on the corner, they're generally not just run-of-the-mill drug addicts. They're engaged in crimes to support their drug habit. And when PPB opens up their backpack, 500 pills spill out. So in general, criminals take over the minute sunsets, and there's no normal people out in downtown.
No, there's not. And
it's really scary.
It's like the screaming sounds echoing through the streets at night too are extremely
because
eerie.
all these people are having mental events.
Yeah.
It's literally an outdoor, I mean, it's during the day too, but the point is, since 110, we've suddenly had this explosion of outdoor insane asylums and outdoor open air drug markets. And what we don't have is intervention. Thanks to Mike Schmidt, we no longer have drug court for the people who need it the most, for the people who are just supporting their drug habit, who are not slashing throats, who are, look, I'm not dismissing petty crime. I think you should pay consequences for petty crime, unlike Mike. I think that should involve at least the threat of jail, but it should involve diversion and drug court, and those people are successful. Obama funded drug courts because drug courts work. Kevin Barton explained this on my podcast. He still has drug court for lower level offenses in Washington County. It works extremely well. Their recidivism rate, which means the people who continue to commit crimes to fulfill their drug habit, is relatively low, bizarrely, which frankly, I find that to be, it's over 50%. I think it's much higher. It might be, well, anyway, it's over 50%. And I find that to be a rousing success given the drugs we're dealing with today, like fentanyl, like this P2P meth that Sam Quinones talks about, who's an author, who's written a couple of books and articles in The Atlantic about this new meth, like it all has fentanyl in it now, this trank that's eating away people's bodies. If you can get off that stuff with, Kevin Barton's drug court, I mean, why are we not modeling this?
The rock bottom should be like legal, but rock bottom now is just death. Like, that's the only rock bottom people are hitting in Multnomah County.
That's kind of the
being dead.
Portland compassion is to let
we have
people waste
normalized
away.
What is not normal.
Yeah.
It's not normal to smoke Fetty on a sidewalk and blow it around everybody trying to get to work and get their kids to school. That's crazy.
Yeah, and we just to mention it, that study came out like a couple weeks ago.
I know, and there's fentanyl all over
public transit and everything.
It's covered with fentanyl residue.
And I think no matter if you think like repeal or repair 110, everyone has seen the because I voted for it too, but
I'm the only one. No.
You're smart.
Smart one.
The only effects that I've seen are like increased drug use, increased crime.
Yes.
I don't know the positive, that's come out of it. So, but I think most of the.
I mean, Mike would say, I know what they would say. I mean, Mike would say
crime reform or
yeah. I mean, he would say, well, the positive that's come out of it is that We don't have as many people in jail for drug possession. But here is the deal. So Leslie Beenan has a fantastic Twitter feed, and her handle is L Beenan Vet because she's trained as a veterinarian. She has a fantastic Twitter feed, and she has looked, if you go through her Twitter feed, it's relatively recent tweet. She looked at the Department of Corrections statistics. Now, Nathan had said this. Pretty sure Kevin Barton said it too. But and maybe this is what caused her to look for it, and I should have looked for it. She just went to the Oregon Department of Corrections statistics. No one in the state of Oregon generally was in jail for drug possession.
I just remember I heard this. Yeah,
nobody,
because he was claiming to fix that basically, and there's no evidence that was.
And the argument is we can't get rid of 110 because then everybody will be in jail.
Make up a problem and then fix it.
Yeah, they're afraid that they'll start throwing people in jail for smoking a joint, which never happened.
No one bothered. It never happened before marijuana was legal. It never happened before medical marijuana. It just didn't happen in Oregon. It wasn't. Our issue was not incarcerating. People in possession of drugs. That's never been our issue. And if you go and look at the Department of Corrections statistics, it's true. They are peddling a narrative that is not backed up by data because they're used to getting away with it.
Yeah.
They don't have to look at numbers, and nobody requires them to. They just accept it. They just go, oh yeah, we just had a lot of black people in jail for possession of drugs.
Yeah.
No, we didn't. We never did.
It's interesting because I'm going to go out on a limb here. Maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but I feel like that might be a common thing in Oregon to almost co-opt a problem that's common in the South of the country.
Sure.
And then tie that to Portland.
Common. And it's we're fixing everybody else's problems that don't exist here.
It kind of reminds, we were talking about abortion a little bit before. It kind of reminds me of that, of people try to make Oregon this fighting, battleground for, and it's we have the most rights of anybody for when it comes to that.
No restrictions.
Yeah.
No restrictions on abortion.
But they try to craft this battle of it's the South where
I know.
I don't know, but I just want to point that out.
And we're solving racism and we're just solving everything.
I mean, it's easy to solve racism when you're the whitest big city in America.
Yeah. It's not really an issue.
Most people don't have black friends. Right. Yeah, it's really easy to solve racism. But here's the other thing. You also don't understand that community. That means if you're a native like me, you're not going to understand the black community in the way that, say, my best friend who's from Georgia does. And as she says all the time, she's like, it's just astounding to me how people in this city think every black person they meet is poor. And I understand it because we do have this income disparity between white people and black people in Portland, and a lot of that is due to the fact that, yes, we didn't have slavery, but we were a very racist state. We did have redlining. We did send black people to Vanport. That flooded. Thank goodness, we're coming back into Portland, but there were all sorts of barriers to them.
I think it was in the Oregon Constitution, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, there are all sorts of barriers to black people getting ahead, for sure, in Oregon. And so it's resulted in this. I mean, we just don't have a very big community. Now, according to Lionel Irving, who was on my podcast, who's on the FITCOG team, the community violence gun reduction team.
Sure.
He's black, and he will say he served prison time for shooting somebody in the back. And he served his time, and now he's trying to get back to the community. He will say black people live in this, based on demographics, and if you look at numbers, that sounds right. They are moving out of Portland. It is too expensive. It is being gentrified, and now they're in East County.
Okay.
So they're out a lot of black people are moving out to Gresham. So again, it's just less contact with this population that we profess to care so much about and know so much about. But like my girlfriend said, I mean, she said, look, if I sit next to a black person, because I'm from Georgia, I'm going to assume this guy could be poor, or he could be an orthopedic surgeon who lives in Buckhead, which is a fancy neighborhood in Atlanta. People in Portland just assume black people have no money and they're all in jail and they all need our help desperately.
I know.
Because they're about to, yes, because they're about to be killed by the police at any minute.
Right.
And they just don't look at that. Or like my friend Breon Gardner, who's been on the podcast, people, when Breon will say, like, when he walks around, people like apologize to him and stuff. I mean, he's very successful. He drives a Range Rover. He's not someone to be pitied.
Yeah, I see it as definitely a new form of racism. But I was just thinking of the new education stuff. Do you know what I'm talking about? How they just lowered, I think it's like math and
lowered reading or language arts and math
they lowered
standards.
more education standards for minority reasons in Oregon.
This has been going on for years.
That's what I see that as the
and
same
we got
way.
rid of graduation standard. I mean, we're just getting rid of all of it.
Yeah, I don't know.
To specifically help a
Right,
certain
they say
portion of
it's-
people, like
They say it's for equity.
There's definitely an
is
assumption.
that not racist?
There's assumptions about people of color that they're just not like they're below standard to begin with. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I mean,
too?
Glenn Lowry would say the professor of economics at Brown who's trained at MIT who's black, he would say that is soft bigotry of low expectations. I mean, he would say, let's give, I mean, either you're saying what are they saying? They can't do it?
Yeah.
I mean, if black people can't do it, I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to accept the statistics that they're doing worse on the test. Let's go ahead and accept that. If they can't do it, give them the tools to do it.
Yeah, rather
What
than
do they
lowering
need?
it, like help
High
people do better.
dosage tutoring. Like what do they need? Look at the numbers. Look at the data. Where are they struggling? Why are they struggling? Do we know any of this? That's not front and center. No one's reporting on that. What is the root cause of all this? And then why wouldn't you tackle that instead of just creating all these imbeciles to go out into the which we already are. Education is in the toilet, and we will continue to be these Oregonians going out into the world as adults with absolutely no standards whatsoever. They're not going to be successful adults.
Yeah. And
other states have standards.
I think it also, like this, what you were talking about, it makes, from people that aren't from the Northwest, it makes Oregonians and Portlanders look like they're just patting people of color on the head a lot of the time. Kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, we treat them in such a bad way, like worse than a lot of the rest of the country.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, we're super racist because we're obsessed with race.
We're obsessed, yeah.
We can't stop talking about it. And we don't even, again, like I talk to some of my most progressive friends and I will say, how many black people, I know this is a trope, but I really want to know, how many black people are you friends with? They cannot name anyone.
Yeah. In Portland,
Not a
that's
single
in Portland, that's a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I live around them, so whatever. But people in other parts of the country are not as obsessed with this whole thing as we are. Like, they just live their lives.
That's
and
right.
They are normal. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Portland is unique.
We don't have that. We don't have the level of integration. We don't have we do have a racist past, so we just don't have these communities that are easily, when when I worked at a big law firm, we had a terrible time attracting minority talent. We don't have the kinds of communities that you would see in a city. We don't, we're not San Francisco. Like, our Chinatown is scary. It's not a good place to be. We just,
not cute.
Yeah, we don't have, a community that people can come and be a part of because it is so darn white and it's just self-perpetuating. No, I get it. Like, I wouldn't feel comfortable here. I don't feel comfortable and I'm white.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
It's a weird place.
Yeah.
It would be nice if it just didn't matter. Like, just all of the racial everything. Like, obsessing over numbers and demographics.
Yeah.
And, like,
It's an interesting.
I wish we could just be people.
Yeah.
And get along with one another the best we can, even if we have different cultures, which is, like, cool. It's nice that people have different cultures, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We kind of were just talking about this, but actually, before we get into, what do you we were talking about the Oregon governor a little bit before. I'm just curious because I've been asking people, like, Oregon has had Republican governors in the past. I'm not saying that it has to be a Republican, but is there any chance of a non-Democrat getting in there?
Totally. I think Christine Drazen could have won if she had just said she was pro-choice. She could have done that. I get, like my girlfriend from Atlanta was saying, I like that she's not just lying to get elected. And I agree, but there's a message that she could have given that would have been truthful, that where she could have said she was pro-choice. she could, because her message was, I'm personally pro-life. I mean, I'm assuming for religious reasons. I don't remember her going into it. But she would say, I personally am pro-life, but Oregonians have spoken. They want abortion rights and they don't want restrictions. And what Oregonians want, I will respect. No one believed her.
Right. She would say, I wouldn't touch it. And,
right.
Yeah.
And nobody believed her. And what was happening is I think people perceived, rightly, certainly in red states, that what had been their right to, and although it was chipped away and chipped away and chipped away, and nobody seems to acknowledge that, but it still existed in a way it certainly didn't after Dobbs. Their rights to abortion access were about to be tanked by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says it's up to the states, so red governors start hacking away at that. I think the concern was, and Tina Kotek rightly capitalized on it, I think she was very smart to do this, and I think it was a trick because that's done by the legislature, not by the governor, but nobody understands how government works around here. So the argument was, hey, Christine Drazen's going to threaten your right to abortion.
Mm-hmm. People believed it, like, really
Christine
hard.
Drazen can't do shit. She's
And nobody wanted to hear that. Like, you could say that to people and they'd be like,
yeah,
abortion.
Yeah.
They couldn't stop it.
Easily became a one issue kind of vote, right?
Totally.
Yeah. That whole election.
On something that she wasn't even going to be able to touch.
Yeah.
But like Christine Drazen could have said, and I think she would have maybe, like, it was weirdly close.
Yeah, was it like 3 or 4% or something?
It was weird. I mean, it was clear by election night. I do remember it was clear Tina was going to win. So it wasn't like a total nail biter, but it was a lot closer than, I mean, it should have been in this state with Portland, probably the craziest city in the U.S. It should have been, and you know, the most populous city in Oregon, who really Metro decides the governor. Abortion's wildly popular, so popular there's no restrictions. Everybody else thinks we're monsters, particularly Europeans. Look at their restrictions. I mean, you think France and Italy are super progressive? They're Catholic countries. Look at their restrictions. Christine Drazen could have just, I mean, I think she was delivering a pro-choice message, and had I been advising her, I would have said, knock it off with the pro-life stuff. Shut up and don't do any buts. Just say, I'm pro-choice, and here's why. I don't believe in abortion. It's not something I would do. It's not something that I think is good. But Oregonians have spoken. They believe in no restrictions, and I respect that. And I think she could have had a lot of people on her team sending out messages like, this is incredible. A Republican is speaking into a microphone saying, no restrictions on abortion? I mean, what Republican says that's cool?
Yeah, well,
go for it.
How strong of a message that would have been if she would have framed it in a bodily autonomy way.
Exactly.
You know, like that could have really skyrocketed her.
Or just pro-democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, that also helps separate her from the crazy wing of the GOP that I think Oregonians really wanted, at least the majority of them, and certainly Portlanders really wanted to repudiate, that was in Trump, and the people that still seem to be having Stockholm Syndrome and are obsessed with him. But I think if she just said all these things that people within the GOP would never say into a microphone with a camera on her, that she was in fact saying, like, we forget that she was saying things like, I'm not going to touch that law. I respect that law. I mean, if you're pro-life, that is repellent to you. If you're part of that wing of the GOP, you're listening to Christine Drazen and you're like, that woman's nuts. I want nothing to do with that woman. Here in Oregon, that sells really well. You can say, the reason I'm pro-choice is because even though personally I'm pro-life, I think people should do, like you said, I think people should do what they want with their own bodies. Women should do what they want with their own bodies. I can have my personal beliefs. You all clearly have yours, and you've spoken, and the legislature has spoken, and you voted for these people, and there's no restrictions on abortion, and that law will continue as long as I'm governor. No restrictions on abortion will continue as long as I'm governor. What GOP candidate says that into a microphone with a camera on them?
I don't think that people are willing enough to vote for a Republican here, though. Like, it doesn't even matter what they say.
I think they would have been if she said that.
I don't think it matters what they say, because I know from talking to someone who did door-to-door stumping for her, you could tell them that there's no way that the abortion was going to get touched by the governor, and they still would not hear it. They could not process in their mind that that was true, and they just cannot bring themselves to vote that way here. Like, you just don't do it.
But I think that's because they don't understand how the government works. They didn't trust Kristine's people to tell them how the government works. Like, they need somebody.
They're not going to listen to them anyway. Their minds are turned off.
That's right. But
like,
they need somebody, if they understood how the government works and that the legislature decides, and if Kristine's message, I mean, a lot of it was, her message was, I'm pro-life. I mean, all people heard was pro-life, and then they shut down.
Well, it took over the whole year.
She shouldn't have even used the words pro-life. She could have just said that abortion with no restrictions, it's not for me. It's clearly for you, and that's great, and I'm not going to touch it, and I can't touch it anyway. And then I don't know what was going on with her team, but there is a way to place news articles to educate people about how abortion rights work in Oregon and about how the legislature would have to be in charge of that. It's really not hard to educate people about government, and it doesn't have to be a Kristine Drazen puff piece.
Yeah.
There was none of that going on. I mean, the media didn't even seem curious about that part. A lot of people were like, she's going to touch abortion. And if I said, oh, no, the legislature has to do that, only because I'm a lawyer were they interested in what I had to say. Otherwise, if anybody tried to educate them about it, it was just like, oh, you're probably just a Kristine Drazen pawn. I think if there was more civic education, if she had a different message and hadn't used words like pro-life, maybe people would have listened to people who were doorbelling for her, because Tina Kotek is the most unpopular governor in America. No one I know wanted to vote for Tina Kotek.
Well, I was going to point out, too, she was also coming off of Kate Brown, who was also a deeply unpopular governor.
Yes,
she was on her last term.
We've had two of the most unpopular governors in the United States.
Yeah, so it should have been a slam dunk, but
we hate ourselves here. We just want to be miserable.
Obviously, there are people that were willing to vote for her, and some of them live here. I know them. I was one of them. That was my first Republican vote ever, because I could decipher what she was saying, and it made sense to me. And I knew that Tina Kotek was just going to be more of the same garbage running our state into the ground. And I just wanted somebody who was talking about, frankly, I just wanted somebody who was talking about law and order, and who was not for Measure 110.
Yeah.
And she was the only one willing to say that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a good.
I guess Betsy was, but
yeah, she was going hard on that stuff. It's a kind of a good transition, because we talked about this a lot already, but I wanted to talk about law and order on the West Coast, in the Pacific Northwest, and just any, like, there's other places like Minneapolis and progressive cities that deal with this. But, like, obviously the DA is up for election next year as well.
Mike Schmidt, yeah.
I'm just curious, like, do you see that finally just turning? Like, I feel like the public here, at least in Portland, is just done with it. Like, their patience is gone when it comes to crime. For the most part, that's kind of what I see. But I'm curious, like, your take on that. Do you think Nathan is going to win that race? And
I mean, I think it's going to be hard fought. Yeah. Mike Schmidt won by a landslide. It wasn't close. He ran against a lawyer at the Department of Justice, assistant U.S. attorney, who was a good lawyer. And the reality is, he was saying the right things at the right time. He's good looking. He's charismatic. And
I might disagree with charismatic.
I mean, I think
he's okay.
is.
He's okay. He's okay. Yeah.
Good look.
I think what's interesting to me, particularly with women, and maybe it's just because are you straight? Do you mind my asking?
Yeah, no, I'm
okay.
Yes.
So I think it's because you're a straight man.
It could be, yeah. Straight men see him as soft. Is that kind of where you're going? Women see him as...
Every woman I know, with the exception of a number who just find him so repellent they can't see that about him, think he's relatively dreamy. And I think he does, yes. And he's tall, and he has a beard, and I think he has
I would not
little
have
children,
thought that.
and I think he does well on the camera.
You can count me in the group of...
Right.
I could totally see...
That are just so repellent by his policies, it's not going to happen. But he's a good-looking guy.
Yeah, I could see progressive women having that viewpoint.
I mean... Yeah, I'll never forget, like, being at some event with like-minded people who did not vote for Mike Schmidt, who will not vote for him ever, certainly in this next election, and are campaigning really hard for Nathan Vasquez. And he was around, and a bunch of the people in this group, women, straight women in this group, were like, I'm going to go get in line and meet Mike Schmidt. And I just remember, like, my head almost exploded. I was like, what? And then, like, he's just really hot. I just want to shake his hand. And
okay, I need to look him back up.
That was when I just, especially when he was doing his videos in COVID, he would have like a little sweatshirt on that was like slightly zipped down.
I remember those videos, yeah.
Yeah, and he'd be in his car, and he's got a smile, and he's smiling a lot, and he's talking about justice, and he's talking about Teach for America, and he went to like a what had been a traditionally women's college. I mean, I just think he is really sellable, and he's
not hot.
Look, in Portland,
He looks like a male feminist.
Well, see, that's attractive.
In my opinion,
to progressive.
In my opinion, in Portland, this is, and I'm just gonna. I live here, so I'm included in this. This is an unattractive group of people, and when you have somebody like Mike floating around, who's at least a 5.
Okay.
Women are going to be interested, and they're going to perk up.
I see what you're saying.
And I think that works for him. And I think that his message about love and decarceration sells well. But again, like you said, it only goes so far. And when the practical reality of that starts setting in, and people's cars are getting stolen, and people who live in like Bridal Mile, who think crime isn't going to touch them, their windows are getting blown out, and they have to pay for it because it's under their deductible, and it happens again and again and again, and they can't go downtown, and they can't use their city, and they realize that Measure 11 offenders are getting drug court and nobody else is, and they realize that 110 was one of Mike's babies, and they realize that now he's going on a taxpayer-funded trip to Portugal.
Is he going on that?
Yes, he is.
Okay. I figured he probably would.
Well, he was part of 110. I mean, he's totally for keeping 110 around completely and totally intact. And so I think people are looking around and saying, I don't really care how adorable he is. This isn't working for me and my family. Nathan Vasquez is a working DA. I mean, part of what's so brave about Nathan is Mike is Nathan's boss.
Right. He's still to this day.
Yes.
Yeah.
They coexist in an office together. Mm-hmm. Nathan has to do what Mike Schmidt tells him. In general, he has some discretion because he's a senior assistant district attorney, but Mike calls the shots.
It's such an interesting race.
Yes.
Just for that reason.
And it's so brave of him. I mean, he was around long before Mike Schmidt. I think Mike will fire him if Mike wins and Nathan loses, unfortunately. But hopefully he'll be at a DA's office somewhere else, or maybe he'll be at the U.S. Attorney. I don't know. But Nathan has a good future ahead of him no matter what. The point is, Nathan has been prosecuting crimes on behalf of Multnomah County citizens long before Mike Schmidt even joined the DA's office. Okay. Nathan is the one who prosecuted, Nathan has prosecuted Proud Boys, Antifa members. He has no tolerance for criminality. He has no tolerance for extremism that results in criminality. He has no tolerance for bad police. He has and frankly, neither do, there's this weird misconception, and I had it myself until Aaron Schmautz, who's the head of the police union, came on my podcast. There is this weird misconception that the police union wants, and their job is to protect bad police. And what Aaron said, and it rang true to me, and now that I've gotten to know him better and PBB generally better, is that they don't want bad police. They want bad police gone. That makes Aaron's job easier because he doesn't want to be in a position of defending racist a-holes who or bullies who want to protect and serve. He wants nothing to do with extremist. I mean, he uses words like houseless. Like, he wants nothing to do with any extremist right-wing people who are coming in and interested in being part of PPB so they can crack Antifa skulls or something. He has no interest in that. And neither does Nathan. And so what I like about Nathan is that he has no tolerance for any form of criminality. What I don't like about Mike Schmidt is that he's got a group of people that agree with him ideologically that are committing crimes that he, like with his protest policy, he's willing to protect. Right. And in the meantime, he has sent this, as Nathan said when he came on, this very clear, Mike sent this very clear signal to the police that I don't value you.
Yeah.
And that's why, and I think Nathan was very generous. I did not expect him to go into this story. That is why at Southeast Precinct, there was a meeting that was called by the many members of Portland Police Bureau, some of which included sergeants. They wanted to talk to Mike Schmidt, and they wanted to address this protest policy and be like, and they were there in their uniforms, mid-riot, covered in feces, covered in, like, there's rips, there's tears, they smell.
Wow.
They're like, some of their heads are bruised, their bodies are bruised. They've got like 7 layers of body armor on. The jail was set fire. Some of them were, Nathan was in the jail. Nathan Vasquez was in the jail when it was set fire, by the way. Mike Schmidt was not. Nathan was in that jail when it was set fire. He was seeing the results of those crimes that Mike wasn't on the ground seeing, and they called him in to talk to him and to get him out of his ivory tower issuing edicts about crimes he wasn't going to prosecute, which was basically, that was a signal that this was now a free-for-all. And as Nathan said, it had the results that I think even Mike didn't intend. All of a sudden, you know, Antifa's looking for a fight. They've been given a green light by Mike Schmidt. And not only that, Mike Schmidt in general is giving a green light to crime. And so in comes the alt-right to, in Proud Boys and what have, like, as Nathan said, the Alan Sweeneys of the world, to do battle in Portland, Oregon. And Nathan says this, it became a crucible of violence. And he says that is in large part to because of Mike Schmidt's policies, and I agree with that. And during this meeting, Mike pushed Nathan forward and insisted that Nathan be there. And Nathan attempted to broker some kind of peace between Mike Schmidt and PPB, as he recounts. And PBB was very angry, and they had a lot of hard questions. And he said he was getting all these text messages from police that he works with, you know, and I mean, they're getting ready for trial. They're going to exchange numbers so that they can talk about strategy and things. So they had his cell phone, and they're texting him saying, let him talk. We've heard enough from you. And I think Nathan didn't say this, but what I've heard is what the message was, to Mike, was get out from under Nathan's skirt and talk to us.
Okay.
And he had nothing to say, and certainly nothing that placated them, because they, as Nathan said, they were looking for somebody who was a system partner with them, who was going to, yes, prosecute them if they engaged in criminal behavior, as they want him to. In general, the police force wants Mike to prosecute bad police. They want that. They don't want to police with bad police.
Yeah.
Talk to anybody on PPB about Derek Chauvin. They will tell you that was terrible policing, and he's a murderer who belongs in jail. They don't want to police with bad police. So they agree with Mike that bad police shouldn't happen, that bad policing shouldn't happen. I mean, there are things that they agree on. And I think that's why Nathan was thinking, hey, maybe I can broker something. But instead, what they got was silence, and they don't have a system partner. And there was a mass exodus, as there should be, because the signal was, I don't value you. I don't appreciate you. I'm not going to work with you. You are the enemy. He was practically speaking, and this is a very online alt-left term, but abolitionist, which used to mean against slavery, now means dismantle the police. Yeah. There is a very strong abolitionist rhetoric coming out of Mike Schmidt's mouth. That is not workable when you need to enforce the law, and when a majority of your city wants police and wants the law enforced.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you were saying like how we got started, that meeting's really interesting too, by the way.
So interesting. Yeah. And Nathan was so generous. I swear to God, I said, I heard about this and I don't expect you to talk about it. And I almost fell out of my chair, and he said, I'll talk about it. It's
interesting, yeah, because I was trying to like visualize it. So did Mike actually show up?
Yes.
Eventually, and then he just
he dragged Nathan in with him, and the whole idea was Nathan will just...
He's like this front man.
Yeah. I'm the and Nathan said it was clear that Mike had a ton of outside influence in issuing this protest policy. And Mike had been, he did a stint at the DA's office. Nathan will say Mike's never tried never been to trial on a serious case. He's prosecuted many serious cases as the DA that Nathan's handled in trial. And people who work under him, but in general, he doesn't have a lot of serious trial experience. He spent time in the legislature. Mike is a great politician. And I think he was just like, hey, I'm just going to be doing my policy over here. And because I'm not Nathan trying cases with the cops over here, I can keep this distance between me and the police who I think Portlanders hate so much, and I'll be beloved for doing so. And I think the media, a lot of people in the media applauded him for that. I think he got a fair amount of national press coverage for his protest policy. But I think the majority of us, again, that's part of why I started the podcast. I think the majority of us were whispering to ourselves and talking quietly about what is this new era of lawlessness in Portland, and how are we going to go about our get to work, raise our kids, and just try to like keep our heads down and get through life without being besieged by crime and 180 plus nights of riots.
There's a lot of downstream effect too, because once people knew that lawlessness won in Portland, then all kinds of crime got unleashed, like the car thefts and just broken windows, burglaries,
catalytic converters. I mean, that's
catalytic converters. It was insane. Like nightly in my neighborhood, you could hear them just grinding away, stealing people's catalytic converters.
It's like open season, basically.
Yeah, and they knew there were no consequences. So like everyone just came here to come do their crimes. Which, you know what?
Yeah.
If we have people leaving Oregon, at least we have more people coming in to do drugs and steal our shit.
We're losing $1 billion. We lost $1 billion in taxpayer money last year.
From the
out
people
of just Multnomah County.
Yeah.
Just a tiny subset of the state. And that's not Washington County. It's not Clackamas. In fact, that's where a lot of them are moving to, although a lot have also gone to Idaho, Texas, Florida, everywhere else. Like everybody else is driving up those poor people's property values where they can't, probably thought they could buy before and now can't. But like Nathan said, I think Mike's protest policy also had the opposite effect of what he intended, which is inviting in the alt-right to mix it up in Portland.
Yeah, well, it's interesting the way you explained it, because I mean, first of all, a DA should be the last person to have any kind of like preferential, like ideological shell.
Just prosecute crime.
Yeah. So, but it makes a lot of sense the way you explained it, of like that then invites a lot of other parties because they see
we'll just blend in with this protest, and if we're out in a protest, we're not going to be prosecuted. I mean, we were one of the few cities that had a death during the riots of 2020, and George Floyd wasn't even murdered here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's several states away.
Yeah, and we had somebody killed.
Yeah, and Seattle had multiple people.
Yeah, well, that's how CHOP got dismantled, as some poor kid,
There's a couple kids
wandered into that horrific. They gave a police precinct. I still can't believe that happened in Seattle, which is frankly doing far better than we are. And I still can't believe it happened. But some poor kid wandered into this Capitol Hill autonomous zone where it really was lawless. And Jenny Durkin, the mayor at the time, was calling it the Summer of Love. And this kid was shot and I think killed. And then they finally realized we got to dismantle this. This is completely out of control. And he may have been black, and that might have been part of the issue.
Yeah.
But yes, inevitably, the people that you think you're protecting are going to get hurt by this.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we saw in East County. And I think that's part of why all of these people that Mike thought he had locked up, like the most diverse parts of Portland, voted for people like Renee Gonzalez.
Right.
They didn't vote for Joanne Hardesty.
Well, because their children and their friends are getting gunned down in Portland. Like,
right.
Who's getting murdered? Black people.
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty much.
At a higher clip than our peers, at a higher clip than like Baltimore,
You're right.
than many of our peer cities. It's more dangerous to be black here.
Because it's for a while there
gang
was
violence. Like they're shooting each other, and they're just dying. Like it's not compassion.
I feel like it's settled a little bit, but for a while there, it was like every night there was shooting.
I know, and I think you're right. I think it's this year when they tally it, it'll be lower, and we'll finally have a year where we're not breaking our homicide record, but it's way too high.
It's high, yeah.
It's way too high.
Yeah.
I still hear drive-by shootings happening.
Yeah, you're kind of in
just rolling around. Yeah, I could hear gunfire last night. From my living room. Pop, pop, pop.
And you have not moved because
we invested in a house in 2018, and what were we gonna do? I mean, you can't just. I've got 4 kids.
I can attest because I am working sort of adjacent to the mortgage industry, and so as what we were gonna say, you want to keep that rate on your mortgage.
Yeah, if we move now, our mortgage rate is going to be insane.
Over twice as much.
And we can't even afford to move here.
Would you consider doing something like, I mean, I've seen a lot of people do, well, frankly, like actually a lot of people from formerly diverse areas like North Portland are doing, sell and then move to East County and, rent until you can buy. I mean, I'm just thinking like you have 4 kids and you're hearing gunfire every night. What would it take to push you over that edge, if anything? Or is it just going to be like you, the gunfire, the cockroaches, and the homeless people?
I think the threshold is as soon as like a bullet goes through the window.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's inevitable at this point?
Out. I don't know. I mean, I'll say our house is old, and all of the windows in it are still very old. So that house has survived in that spot through a lot of gang violence. Since, the past 100 years or whatever. So, I mean, I think we'll probably be good, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very disheartened, and it's been rough and depressing and sucky. And
I know it's something like we've talked about before, even on this show, of like a lot of us look into moving.
Yeah, we just,
but personally, I'm kind of like, I still see hope in Portland, but for a while I was seriously looking at moving to a different state.
I would if I move, I don't want it to be here. I would just want to go somewhere else entirely and get rid of all of the bad feelings that come along with this area now. Because the 2020 era was traumatizing, and it's kind of hard to shake that feeling of just remembering everything that they put us through, and so I would prefer to just be somewhere else. But I don't know what that would be. This is my home, so.
It is heavy. It was some heavy years. This is a horrible transition, but unless you have more to say.
No, go ahead.
I was going to move on to my lighter. That was all very heavy stuff, and I love this episode. But tell me about how you came here to the Northwest, because I think you were saying you're like 5th generation here. You've been here for...
Yeah, I mean, some multiple... How I came here,
or I'm just curious about like your.
I mean, I was born here,
your
so
Northwest.
It's like it's a hermetic place. I mean, once I think, I don't know, not so much anymore. Now it's a lot of California transplants, but for a long time, if you were born here, you just stayed here. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's still a contingent of people like that, especially. It's the weirdest part in my neighborhood. Like, it's people who will get together with other moms from school, and they'll have gone to the same high school, and they grew up in that neighborhood. I don't know. It's very...
Wow.
I didn't grow up in that neighborhood, but it's very strange to hear that they loved it so much that they came back. But also, that's Nancy Rommelman's word, hermetic, but I agree with her that Portland is a really... it's sort of a bubble, and it's hard to see. I mean, I think that's part of why people say things like Portland's beautiful, Portland's awesome, it's just a big city, that's why we have homeless people and garbage everywhere and people blowing fentanyl smoke. And it's like, you haven't been to New York lately, have you? Like, you haven't been. I'm not talking about the South Side again, because a lot of these cities, they have a South Side of Chicago. They have a Tenderloin. They have a Bronx. We don't have that. We just have all of Portland, and it's permeated all of Portland. So when people say things to me like, well, it's just a really big city now, and that's why at night people put mattresses on the sidewalk and smoke fentanyl. And it's like, no, they're not doing that in other cities. I mean, obviously, people are not traveling. They're certainly not leaving. They're also certainly not leaving the United States for much, much bigger cities. That doesn't happen in anywhere else.
I was thinking earlier, when you said, like, imagine if we had like a 110 in New York City. I was like, oh my God, that would be. They
wouldn't pass it.
It would just be crazy. That'd be like Escape from New York or something, or I don't know what it would look like.
There's just too much money there. I mean,
too much at stake.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're not insane.
Right.
They would not pass that. They elected a cop as their mayor. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine us? I mean, maybe now. I don't know. Mike Reese is like, who's a former sheriff, is saying that maybe he'll run. I don't really know. I mean, maybe. Maybe we had we did have a mayor who was a cop.
Potter?
Potter at one point. Although a lot of people think that's when the city started going downhill, was right after Vera Katz. So I don't know. The cops are always the best mayors. And I think a lot of people have things to say about New York's mayor that maybe are not, some centrist or right of center people have things to say about Mayor Adams that are not complimentary. But that said, I mean, if you think about like Portland and as like Antifa headquarters, where Sarah Iannarone said, I am Antifa, and wore like a skirt with a bunch of dictators on it where she knew she would be photographed by media. People like that being very close to being mayor, the idea of us electing a cop just seems almost laughable.
Yeah. Very distant kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just think we're the craziest.
Yeah.
We're just the craziest.
I mean, what if he like dressed like Che Guevara?
Just,
right.
Or had like a skirt like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just had a vibe.
Yeah. That would help.
Right. Yeah. Cosplay.
Yeah. Tell me about, I always ask these questions at the end. Your favorite person, place, thing. Could be anything in the Northwest. Doesn't have to be like.
Oh boy, I'm not a good Northwesterner. My favorite thing in the Northwest.
Are you like a foodie? Do you have like a place like that?
I mean, a lot of the restaurants that I really like to close down. I mean, there's new ones opening up that I like that are good. You know what? Okay, I have something. And it's in Portland. My favorite. I have two things. My favorite thing that I frequent the most, probably because I have. I'm just heavily involved, and I have friends who are heavily involved, is the Oregon Symphony, with a close second being the Portland Art Museum. Okay. The Oregon Symphony is a world-class institution. I just went to Common. It was fantastic. I'm going to Cypress Hill in October, and the classical performances that they put on are absolutely at level with the best symphonies in the United States. We pay these musicians a ton of money because they are really good. This current CEO of the symphony, Scott Showalter, who is stepping down, and a guy named Isaac, I think his last name is Thompson, is coming in his place. He seems great. But I know about Scott, who's been on my podcast, that current CEO of the symphony, that he was a associate dean at Stanford Law School. I mean, these are really amazing people who are running an absolutely incredible institution filled with very, very, very talented musicians, particularly people like Peter Forhola, who is the first chair in violin. This is a guy who could play with really any orchestra. He chooses to play with the Oregon Symphony. Portland Art Museum, no, none of these institutions are supported by the city. They're not supported by the county. They're not funded. They are only donor funded.
Didn't the Portland Art Museum used to be? Did that change? Or maybe not?
They both used to be.
Okay.
So part of the reason that Brian Frieso from the Portland Art Museum and Scott Showalter from the Symphony came on my podcast was to talk about how little city, county, and state support they get. And the reason Scott Showalter took that job is because he was promised public support, and people don't understand that this arts tax, most of it does not go to the Oregon Symphony. I mean, I think they get pennies of that. It doesn't go to the Portland Art Museum. And so they were on to talk about how they are pretty much solely donor funded institutions. The Oregon Symphony is a world-class institution. The Portland Art Museum has world-class collections like the Chinese collection, like the Native American collection, which are absolutely incredible, and they need money to protect that and to conserve it, because I think one thing that we don't really think about when we look at beautiful things like that is that in order to have and preserve that collection, they need a fair amount of infrastructure. They need air conditioning, they need fireproofing, they need floodproofing. I mean, think about probably the kinds of insurance style infrastructure that the Louvre has for their collections, right? We don't have that, but we have a version of that needs to be kept up and is very expensive. It's not just the art, and it's not just keeping the art in its current form or restoring it, et cetera, et cetera. It's also just storing all this stuff that isn't necessarily on display, or if they have a special collection. When they have a special collection, they pay for that. When we had Yo-Yo Ma opening night at Oregon Symphony, the symphony paid a ton of money to Yo-Yo Ma to have him play. And as Scott Showalter will tell you, we need institutions like the Oregon Symphony, like the Portland Art Museum, because when people come to the symphony, they go out to dinner. They populate downtown. They help small businesses. And for some reason, our government is too short-sighted to understand that an investment in our arts institutions, I mean,
We'll
I
pay
thought
for anything
Portland
else.
was artsy.
Don't we pay for everything here?
I don't understand it. Like, I'm just like, I thought they liked art.
That's so
and
funny.
Culture and they love to talk about how creative Portlanders are. Well, yeah, they're also musicians that have bizarrely chosen to live here, and people that work for those institutions that need to be supported. And there are still small businesses and very good restaurants around the symphony where you can walk down and you can see people like Amine, you can see Nas, you can see, it's not just Mahler, and it's as fabulous as Yo-Yo Ma is. It's not just Yo-Yo Ma. It's Common, who played last week. It's absolutely amazing the kind of talent they're able to attract by donors, like my friends, the Angeles, who are literally basically, and the Walt Weilers of the world, who are literally basically just supporting the symphony out of their own kindness, who don't have to give so much of their discretionary funds and time to this institution, but feel compelled to do it because who else will?
Right.
And I think like people like Jordan Schnitzer, who are helping the symphony or helping places like the Portland Art Museum, who, by the way, began by B Lake's Hope Center, which is one of the few shelters in the Portland area that actually works. And I had a guy named Patrick Burnite on the last episode with Andrea Suarez talking about how Andrea found him on the streets of Seattle. Bybee Lakes would take him. He was ready to get off of drugs. He was ready to get out of a tent. He was ready to become employed. She got him to Bybee Lakes. She drove him herself in her car to Bybee Lakes Hope Center. They helped him get off of drugs. They helped him get a job. He now works at Bybee Lakes Hope Center. That was started by Jordan Schnitzer. We vilify Jordan Schnitzer in the city because he has money. But what people don't understand is that money is funding these beautiful institutions that are some of the few nice things we still have. And we only have it because people like him, for some weird reason, still choose to live here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or I know Homer, what's his name? Homer Williams.
Yeah, Homer
Does a lot
Williams
of
built
that
the
too.
Pearl District.
Yeah.
You know, ever heard of the Pearl District? Remember when it was really nice? He built it.
Right. Well, and he also, I think they both do a lot of philanthropy with
They do.
Homelessness and all
That's
that.
exactly right. Yeah, that's Homer's issue is homelessness.
Yeah. But you're right. Like people jump on them immediately as,
They're developers.
hyper capitalists
They own
and they have a lot of,
buildings.
and it's like, well, they're also giving a lot of money to these things. So,
Yeah, and it's also like, what, you want a city with no buildings? Like, what's so weird is they're all for this YIMBY stuff where we all are supposed to live in buildings, in micro apartments or something. We're not supposed to have yards. We're not supposed to have homes, which, by the way, is like part of why people still move to Portland. The only reason we still have like California money coming in is because people want a yard. They don't want to live in a micro apartment. But anyway, they want that. But who do they think is going to own these buildings? Mm-hmm. These unemployed people that like, or at least for a lot of the year, that live in house shares, that work as baristas sometimes.
yeah.
They're going to own the building. Like, what? They're going to form a collective and buy that building?
There's I don't know. I feel like Seattle's probably the same way. There's just such a general anti-landlord like attitude here. And I understand like if you're a renter, that sentiment, but it's like, I don't know.
Oh my God. But here's the thing. Like, the only reason those people can rent is because there's somebody who owns a building that's renting it to you.
Yeah.
It's insane.
For a price you ostensibly must be able to afford, or you wouldn't live here.
Yeah.
The fact that people can't connect these things in their minds astounds me.
Yeah, it's like, if you hurt that person, who's going to pay for that? You are. Your rent's going to go up.
Yeah. I just had someone on the other day. I don't think I was talking about it on the show, but that we were talking about, there's some like programs now to where you can like almost crowdfund to buy a property.
I've heard that.
But we were talking about how like what we were just discussing, like then you become the landlord and you kind of like now you're the enemy because you
monster.
own, you know what I'm saying?
I
Like,
mean, I think, wouldn't they just say,
They would say like, I didn't buy it with my own money or something.
Land is land and we all own it. I mean, wouldn't they just say that? Wouldn't they just say like Tina Kotek, like how, I mean, especially in regard to like a building that's housing, like housing is a public good. So I mean, this is very anti-anarchist. I've never talked to them about how this would work in real life, but is the idea that what the government owns all the property, which just seems anti-anarchist.
I think that is the end
or
goal.
That there isn't a government, but we all just own it and we happen to chaotically exist and love each other in all these buildings we own.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely the new, what's it called? The new order thing of like, you won't own anything. And but I don't know. I was telling that whole thing because it's like at the end of the day, somebody's name has to go on the deed of the property.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that no one in the world probably who, except horrible dictators who makes more than $30,000 a year, believes that because it's crazy.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff we could have included in this, but what's your least favorite thing about the Northwest? Like, I know we've been talking a lot about the bad things, but
I mean,
maybe
I
it's something trivial.
I am actually relatively, I am a litigator by trade and probably a pessimist by nature, which is why that's my job. But I do think that Portland there is a silent majority that is starting to speak out. There are people who are talking publicly about these issues more and more. And I think that that's a good thing. I think Renee winning was a great thing. I think Julia Brim Edwards winning in Multnomah County was a great thing. I think that ridiculous capital gains tax that was trying to be pushed down our throats by the Democratic Socialists of America that failed was great. I think there are pieces of Portland that are doing better. I think I'm just one of those people who is not a great native because I dislike the weather. So I'd probably say I just don't like rain.
Okay.
I'm one of those people who's kind of thrilled about living here. And I think global warming is real and I don't think it's good, and I hate the fires. I don't like the fires. But in general, I like longer, warmer summers. So I'm that part, it's unpopular take, but I just know I'm just not a good rain person.
I get it.
I find it very depressing.
I saw a lot of people with umbrellas recently, and I was like,
They're probably transplants
who are
from
these
California.
people?
Yeah. I don't own one, but
Most don't.
I make fun of people.
I had to buy one last year for Halloween because it was dumping. Do you remember this? Like, I don't know. So, oh my gosh, it was torrential. Mm-hmm. And so we had to buy our first umbrellas for that.
I'm just going to, I don't know, I could do a whole podcast of it, but what's bugging me right now is my commute has got so much worse. I go up to Vancouver and like, maybe I'm just like a road rager, but I have at least like almost like 10 people a day in the left lane that just go like 60.
Why wouldn't you live up there? You could pay less money.
It's a good idea.
It's nice. You work up there. You know how nice it is.
It is, yeah.
I saw people leave their tools in their yard.
Yeah.
Like with their garage door open and they weren't even out there.
They have taken a lot of Multnomah County's people.
I know they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
of course they have.
The reason I haven't is because I have a pretty good rent here and it's as a private landlord and I've been sort of locked in and like
I see.
I don't want to lose that rate or that.
So have you done the math in regard to like what you're paying in taxes and what your rent is and like what?
I haven't.
Because I know people that moved there that said, you know what, this whole thing just paid for itself and I've got money left over.
It could because like obviously state income tax.
Yeah.
And you know what, this is gonna make me sound really dumb, but when we were just talking about moving
Metro.
To different states, I had like some opportunities like maybe 6 months ago, and I woke up in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m, and was just went down like a rabbit hole of like sales tax because I've only ever lived in Oregon where we do not have sales tax, and I was just looking at like how much that actually costs and all that stuff. And I know you can come down to Oregon and still buy stuff.
But you also know that there are like exceptions. Like in places where they have sales tax, there are tons of exceptions so that's not a regressive tax. Like in a lot of those places like food and certain household items.
Those aren't taxed, yeah.
It depends on the state, but in general they try to make it so it's not regressive and doesn't hurt poor people who have to also buy things.
Gotcha, yeah. No, I was just like curious because I had never lived in a state with sales, and then I was looking at how like, you know, Washington has its own, and then like if you're in Seattle, there's a city sales tax on top of that, and like
Right.
I think that's right, but I don't know. I just went down a rabbit hole and I was like, kind of weighing the trade-offs. But
We're still higher.
Huh?
We're still higher.
Yeah. Okay.
Multnoma's special.
Yeah, I mean it's Metro, it's Multnomah, it's Portland. I think if you're out of county, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to. I don't know though, because I know a bunch of people from Clackamas who have moved up to Washington, and they're still saving money. So
I think you probably do save.
that's kind of amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, it's really cool. I want to ask you before we wrap it up, and feel free, you can ask anything you want to, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but do you have any political ambitions?
No, okay. I have zero political ambitions. I think I really like I'm one of the few people that actually I really like my job. I think lawyers in general don't tend to like their jobs. I really like my job. I would have political ambitions, except as Renee said, if you run for, look, city council, if it's true that you can win with 9% of the vote, why aren't we all running, right? We all should be running. But then when I heard that no moonlighting provision is still in place in regard to city council, which is weird because you're not even going to be in charge of a bureau, but I think it's to keep people like me out, which is, I get it. I would have to give up my law license. I would run, and I said this, and I would, if they would get rid of that, I would run for city council. Why not?
They just, right now, they have a stipulation that you have to give that up.
Yeah, there's no moonlighting. So, for instance,
I see. I got you.
I think there's, Candace Avalos, who was on the Charter Commission, has not announced that she's running for city council, but in the meantime, she has put out feelers and maybe even installed a director of her nonprofit. Okay. I think probably, and this is just my opinion and speculation, to focus on a campaign because she knows she can't have that job.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because that was the whole Fagan thing, basically, what brought her down. I know that's a state thing, but...
Well, although, see, what I don't get about that, and I think that's complete garbage, what I don't understand about that is, yes, I think the legislators are paid too little, but they can moonlight. They can have jobs. They do have jobs. A lot of them are doctors. There's a ton of female physicians in the legislature. I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but it's a weird phenomenon in the Oregon legislature. There's a lot of female doctors. They still have medical practices. Fagan was a lawyer. She could have made, even part-time, really good money. The average salary in Oregon is not high. It's small. If you look it up, it doesn't come close to hitting $100,000.
Yeah.
She was hitting that, is my understanding. If you combine her law salary with her legislative salary, she makes it sound like she was pumping gas, and this is all she could do to get by is engage in these deals with marijuana shop owners. That's silly.
Yeah.
That's absolutely ridiculous. Chloe Udali barely had a couple of nickels to rub together, was on Portland, living in Portland. Mia Fagan was not living in Portland, as far as I know. I think she was living in a suburb somewhere, not even in Multnomah County.
I don't think at that point she was living in
Portland. And Chloe Udali owns this. She owned a bookstore. Those don't make money unless you're like Powell's, and I don't even think they make buckets. And had a disabled son, and I don't think she had a partner helping. And she had city council salary before it was bumped up to what these charter commissioners are bumping it up to. She wasn't, as far as I know, engaged in side deals to hustle up money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just, I just find that so silly. But, do I think the legislators are paid too little? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're paid so little that they have to engage in
right.
Mexican style corruption or something. They are paid.
Yeah, they get something. Well, cool. Is there anything you want to ask before we wrap it up or add or?
Well, why? I guess I'm curious. Why did you decide to take the leap and speak out, especially given that you were, for instance, physically the target of, it sounds like violence when you were operating a camera.
I wouldn't call it, I know people that are way more
that were injured.
assaulted than me, but Yeah, for the most part, similar to you, I just kind of got tired of it. And I also, I have like the technical capacity to do a show like this. I love podcasts that are on video coming from TV. Like I worked in TV for a long time. And I've been telling people this too. I feel the same way you do, that there is, I don't know if it's a groundswell, but there's definitely a community of people like us who are similar minded, and that we want change in Portland. We've seen the past almost like 10 years of just not a lot changing for the positive. And also seeing this pattern of like voting for stuff that doesn't follow through or fails or doesn't really do what it's intended. And I think I'm trying to also make it okay for younger people to have different. I think a lot of people in Portland just automatically get on autopilot and think I'm on the progressive train track here, and like you're seen as cool if that's like the path you take. But I just think like there's a growing community of people who don't necessarily subscribe to that train of thought, and so yeah, I'm just trying to have a community of that. And also like I have a large network of people I've known over the years with comedy, music. I used to make music videos. So I'm kind of trying to like have this community of culture and politics and news that's a little bit younger. And I think you're helping with that too in your show of like, I don't know, finding that audience, you know? So that's what I'm trying to do. Is just.
Well, thank you. I think that's great.
Yeah. But that's what I'm doing.
And thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. And yeah, if you ever have like people you want to come on here, absolutely let me know. A lot of your guests I've reached out to, and they've come on here.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll wrap it up here. Yeah.
Thank you for what you're doing.